Good morning, Jordan. Welcome. We are here, and we are now online on YouTube. Jordan, did you want to make comments about last week's paragraphs before we go on to 758?
Certainly. I took a couple of notes that I'll contribute.
Okay.
And I kind of backed up to 745 for context.
Okay. So 745. All right. Everything depends on man. This is where Dr. Jung says to us, grow up. Everybody's got to grow up. So
right.
So you don't need to read the paragraphs because those were read last week and I commented on them last week. But you can certainly comment on them and then that'll be a good review for the online audience.
Yeah, paragraph 745, that when they said the knowing, the awareness is the true blessings, or the true blessing. It reminds me of Bruce Lee's quote, patience is an action. Patience is focused power. And so I think there's a seed there that deals with how to not use the evil he's mentioning or the destructive power he mentions in that paragraph. 746 was interesting about the secret hidden pieces, because to me, if I view the psyche like a temple and you have hidden like a basement, that's more soul, deep, dark depth, hidden like as in an attic, more spirit, more above in a way, with literally the ceiling being your own personal firmament, as it were, in a very limiting way, but diagrammatically. And then what's hidden right in front of us, those blind spots of expectation where it's always still the individuation coming to awareness. Can you see what's actually there, or are you seeing a fiction? So my question though there was when they say, I asked, what is this higher plane of morality with the angels that we're supposed to aspire to? Because they seem pretty clumsy in their awareness. They don't know. And they'll just, bump right through us, so to speak. So there seems to be a little doublespeak there that I think Jung is kind of speaking in code, where you kind of have to crack that riddle of, well, it's not a higher plane of consciousness. Don't get all self-righteous. It becomes back to the knowing, the awareness, and the continued process, so that when he gets down to ought, they don't know what they ought to do. And I laugh. I'll just insert a little joke. The only thing I think anyone ought not to do is they ought not to tell someone what they ought to do. And because, honestly, when someone says ought, to me, that's a big billboard that says, hi, I'm projecting on you, because it's a confession of what their perspective is, much like a list will tell you more about the list maker than the contents of the list. I tell you about their priorities. And paragraph 747, it seemed to me people will fear evil so much, but neglect developing love because they're stuck in the fear of evil. They don't want to misstep, but they don't understand that misstepping with the love piece is learning and processing. Misstep with the evil is destruction. Misstepping with love is creation. So there's that piece. I found it interesting, the assumption of Mary. I hadn't even really thought about this before, but, introduced as, the Queen of Heaven with the Assumption of Mary. Well, that's another Christian co-opting of a figure, because the Queen of Heaven is Juno, is Gaia, is Hera, and in different languages and cultures. So in a sense, it's nice that they finally elevated a woman up to one of those positions that the Greeks and Romans had decided women should occupy already. And then I think interesting with the verse in 650 or 750, are you still here? Nay, it's a thing unheard. Vanish at once. We've said the enlightening word. And what's interesting, and that's from Faust, that's just like Lilith uttering the ineffable name of God. So I love that, in Faust, you have this good poets borrow and great poets steal. That's pretty much a, consistent literary theme that's biblical as well as in different stories. I think really, go ahead.
Yeah, on this though, when Lilith speaks the ineffable name of God, I'm not clear what you mean by that, because Dr. Jung here is talking about psychologism, and it's the tendency of scientists after the Enlightenment. It's actually the Endarkenment. After the Enlightenment, the scientists think that if they can explain something, like mansplain something, if they can explain something, then it will disappear. And is that what you mean?
No, because he said, we've said the vanish at once. We've said the enlightening word, and the "Are you still here?" Nay or no. It's a thing unheard. So we're dealing with a blind spot. We're dealing with something that is lack of awareness, lack of consciousness psychologically.
Right.
But vanish at once, that's what God told Lilith to do when she utters his name, except then she's like, well, but wait, I can leave quicker if you just give me wings. So she's smart enough to trick him, and so she can run to do her business and come back as a serpent. But I think that we've said the enlightening word. I think that does go back to what you just said with, people think if they explain it, then it disappears. And the problem is that's like standing behind a car near the exhaust pipe. I mean, because explaining leads to, I think, a disconnection. It's knowing where you can, for example, if you look at your best mentors and mentresses, men and women who have influenced you through life, it's those ones that have that knack to get you to be able to figure it out yourself. But then you have those tingles of the experiential, rather than just, I can say that the transitive property of geometry, if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. Oh, cool. Well, that's just philosophical arithmetic, if P then Q kind of stuff. So again, they're just mansplaining. And even splaining is too much, because I find that to be a projection of, well, maybe you didn't get a word in edgewise with your parents, and now you're having to try to put it on everybody else. I mean,
right. And the interesting thing is that Dr. Jung's position is that we all already know everything at depth. And the question is, how do we bring it up? I had a lot of fun this week talking about the elephant in the room. And, I was talking to these little kids, and I said we were going to talk about the elephant in the room. And then I went on and did some more a little class time with them. And then I came back and I said, now I'm thinking of an animal. Who can guess it? Only one little girl out of a couple hundred students guessed that I was talking about or thinking of an elephant. And then you can say, well, now you're all thinking of an elephant, right? And you all know what it is, right? Well, and that's consciousness. That's consciousness, Well,
it is. And then again, let's expand to a higher morality, as it were, so to speak. Where I always, when people talk about the elephant in the room, I always have to immediately put the clutch in and not laugh, because the architect in me says, must have been a big damn door.
Yeah.
How did it get in there? It's the idea, of course, that it's the most prevalent thing in the group that's missed. But
well, that reminds me of the rabbinical story that Dr. Jung tells in Man and His Symbols, where he says, how does God get into the room? Or a student asks, how does the God come into the room? And if the door's closed, and the rabbi finally says, well, my God comes in under the door.
Yeah. Nice.
Right.
Well, and the thing is, how does God come into the room? And the omnipresent piece in everything, everywhere, then there's no coming or going.
Yeah.
There's no, the goddess Janus, to and from, the goddess of portals and doorways, is absolutely not even birthed yet in the unconscious God. It's just always everywhere. So in a sense, you having the thought of elephant, then everyone will think elephant, is kind of that God is everywhere in a way.
Right. And that is the elephant in the room, which nobody can see. So you have to be able to discern what the other person is thinking. Right.
Yeah.
And
I think that's where, right there, discern what other people are thinking. That goes into paragraph 757 of that we can establish that God acts upon us. It's only through the psyche. Mm-hmm. So that you make the connection you have there to then the psyche is the only way we can access that or establish that.
So this is a very important point that Dr. Jung is making in this paragraph 750, which is that scientists think they can explain away God by somehow describing God, but that doesn't work at all. No, not at all. And so the proctophantasmist, which is a great name that Goethe came up with, the proctophantasmist says, "Are you still here? Nay, it's a thing unheard. Vanish at once. We've said the enlightening word. Well, if you're enlightened and you now can do away with God, well, maybe not."
Well, exactly. And I think the proctophantasmist is interesting because people say, wow, it's okay to drive like an animal. And I'm like, I see. I guess there are a lot of proctologists on the road.
Yeah. Well, I had this interesting experience, which I might have told you once or twice, but in 1970, I was at Combat Base Baldy in Vietnam, and that was the headquarters of the 5th Marines. And this old saw about there are no atheists in foxholes, right? Well, all of a sudden, I started to have as part of my duty to go to the daily briefing of the colonel, the commanding officer of the 5th Marines, which is 5,000 men, was 5,000 men. And on Mondays, the chaplain would get up and he'd say, well, I had 11 or 12 Marines in my chapel yesterday, right? So where was God? Where was God? That's the question that I've been noodling on all year. And I know I wasn't being spiritually helped by the Christian church or by any of my religious upbringing, but I did have spirit. And it came to me that the thing that kept my spirit alive was Bob Hope, okay? Because I was looking forward to Christmas time when Bob Hope would come to the Da Nang area and I could go see his show. And lo and behold, there's another thing there, which is there's a feminine aspect. Okay, he brought the gold diggers with him, but he also always brought a beautiful, beautiful woman who could sing like nobody's business. And at the end of the show, she would sing Silent Night, and it was just gorgeous the way he did it. And his name, by the way, I gather, was not Bob Hope, but the idea was he was giving hope. And so when Christmas was coming close, I was told I wasn't going to get to go to the Bob Hope show. And boy, my spirit was just crushed at that time. I didn't feel good. I was very upset about it. And within a week, I developed a very serious temperature and got very, very sick. I got dysentery, and ultimately I got medevaced to the hospital in Da Nang because I couldn't keep anything down or in. And during that period, I lost 17 pounds. But oh, by the way, because I was in the hospital at that time, I was wearing my blue pajamas in my hospital uniform, and I got to go to the Bob Hope show. And it really gave me good spirit again. And so the spirit may be something else from what the church or traditional religions think it is. And we have to, and so in terms of the old saw, there are no atheists in hospitals and in foxholes. Well, yes, that's true, but it doesn't mean that they're Christian or any follower of any religion necessarily. Okay, they're people who are self-contained and are able to keep their spirits up one way or another. And, to this day, I don't know whether my illness was actually caused by my disappointment of not getting to go to the Bob Hope show, and myself deciding, well, there's one way you could get to go to the Bob Hope show, and that's by being in the hospital.
Yeah. Well, the somatics, just the body piece of that psychologically is so beautifully interesting. That psychosomatic piece where you literally went through a very non-minor capital D downgoing, like Nietzsche and
Absolutely. And it wasn't that it was psychosomatic. I mean, this one particular day, I was very, very sick, and my team commander told me to go to the battalion or the regimental aid station where there was a Navy doctor. And so I walked into the place, and he took my temperature, and he looked up at me and said, "Do you see that helicopter out there, Lieutenant? Get on it."
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that I was being medevaced, but all of a sudden here I am flying to Da Nang, and I get to the hospital, and there's another doctor at the hospital, and he's doing triage, and he takes my temperature, and he says, "Lieutenant, you see that shower over there? Get under it." And of course, it was all cold water, and he had to bring my temperature down really, quite smartly, because it was 104. So I was really sick, but whether that was partially brought on by the experience of having my spirit crushed, I don't know. Maybe it could have been.
Well, and when I say psychosomatic, I should probably say psyche-somatic, because to me, psychosomatic means it's all in your head. And right. I didn't mean that. And to me, what's interesting is there's that psychological transference of one to themselves. And so, I mean, your whole feeling sense, your mood, then transferred to the body. I mean, to the soma.
Absolutely.
In that sense, whether that's exactly what happened, or whether there was a beautiful synchronicity or unbeautiful synchronicity, except in the end, it was beautiful. I mean, so, I mean, the diamond goes through the most heat and pressure, and look at it, and that's a metaphor for how to come out the other side, but also how to experience the passage.
Right. So I digress. So go ahead and do the rest of your commentary up to 757.
No, I don't think that was
until I interrupt you again.
Exactly. I think, I think what's interesting that 751, one would be very ill-advised to identify with such a childish standpoint, meaning the scientists. I mean, because Jung I like that he said childish, not childlike. because that to me, every time I hear someone talking about expert this and expert that, I always lean over and put my hand on their shoulder and I said, I'm not trying to hire you, so I don't need your resume,
Right.
because you get people who they're so excited about what they do, and that's cool.
Yeah.
But when they basically have the left foot on the clutch and the right foot all the way to the floor, and don't really realize that they forgot about the left foot and pop the clutch, and now they're just flying.
Yeah.
And you got to kind of partially stay out of the way, but partially rein them in. There's that. It's like a small boy, he's just freaking. But if you just lift him up, no words, no anger, no charge, lift him up and let him kind of random wiggly in the air and slowly put him against the wall. So half of him starts to stay, and then he'll stop and go, oh, I could do that myself. They'll learn to self-regulate because there no emotion contributed, no fuel to the fire. And you're then being childlike with the child instead of childish, which is, screaming and tantruming the adult to the child. It's basically, you're interrupting my schedule, so stop it. There's no empathy there. I mean, so there are boundaries, but I think it's interesting when he attributes that, childishness to the scientific expression about how limiting it is. And then, he goes on in 752.
Oh, well, don't get too far past 751. That's one of the most important paragraphs.
Well, then I'll stick there. And it's interesting there and sticking there, there's no atheists in foxholes. It kind of lends the water bearer concept of gravity to God, where it'll, water will find its own level and the foxhole's lower. So it's going to drain in there. And as if there's the divine will find the bottom, or divine will find the bottom. I mean, it's not just like the stock market. I mean, here's the trough, here's the trench, here's the foxhole. Well, the water's going to fill it first when it rains.
Right. But those are all physical facts. And 751 is about something that's not physical, right?
It is. And I think it's the unseen, again, like in a basement, or unseen as in an attic, and I don't mean the actual walls around the attic, it's the space, because I think there's a concept in architecture where the feel of the space is not primarily the acoustics and the shape of the walls that are basically ossified around this amorphous nothing is in the air thing. But I think there's an identity to the space that's that inner world. That's a, depth psychology metaphor of the psyche, where there is a lot of nothingness that makes everything thingnesses, as it were.
Right. So if you go into a mosque, for example, and there's pretty much nothing inside a mosque, maybe, a few Arabic words that are different names for God, just in words, but nothing more. And yet there's no doubt that God is present there. Right. And I mean, if you're a Muslim, that God is very present there. But even if you're not a Muslim, you have to realize that there is God there present.
Definitely. And that reminds me of Pascal, Blaise Pascal's quote about cathedrals. He said, the eternal silence, I think if I paraphrase it correctly, if I remember it, the eternal silence of these infinite spaces terrifies me. And and there's the truth in that. And what I find is, if I even drop down to, I think, again, a physiological example, but to express how much this nothingness piece is, if I take a neuron that fires, well, that's the leap of faith. It's across nothingness of the synapse.
Sure.
And that's lightning from one to the other, except that's the syzygy. That's the both and. I have a thing and a no thing. But if I add the second neuron where it's going to connect, there's a little mini seed of individuation where a connection was made, where it was basically 1, 2, 3 is 1/3 nothingness and
Right.
1/3 seed and 1/3 oak tree. I mean, so oak tree sprouting, as it were.
Right.
So,
right. And so what is individuation? Individuation means that the acorn becomes an oak.
it becomes an oak, exactly.
Right.
And I think what's interesting in that just little 1, 2, 3 neuron synapse neuron diagram, 30% of that is silence, is
Right.
nothing. And so
Well, and I find that if I go to the Cathedral of the Navy, which is 2 miles from me, it's the chapel at the Naval Academy. I can't go there for service anymore because the chaplain's corps has been taken over by mansplainers. Okay, pretty much. I mean, they're people that want to harangue that God absolutely is physically real, and you have to believe that. Well, I
Right.
don't believe anything anybody tells me anymore until I know it myself.
right,
And and then once you do know it, then you can't listen to these guys anymore because they're just interrupting their background noise for what God has to say to you. And every one of us can communicate with that inner something, which is God, no matter how you want to talk about it.
well, I
and-
remember teaching tarot to a student, and they said, well, okay, well, let me, and turns over and she pulls out a book and starts reading. And I said, no one's going to pay you for a bedtime story that you can read out of a book.
Mhm.
This needs to come from deep within, and how your intuition maybe has been informed by your whole life up to this point, not just what you consider to be this meaning for this little piece of cardboard with pictures on it.
Right.
And
So that's why tarot doesn't necessarily capture you if what you're doing is laying out a tarot reading and then reading from the book. Okay, this is what this means at this point, and so on, which is the way Debbie and I got in the first place. One of our friends used to come over about once every 3 months, and we'd do a tarot reading with the Mother Peace tarot cards, and basically what we were doing was reading out of the book. She wasn't trying to do a tarot reading per se, and Debbie and I didn't know enough about tarot to really understand what was going on. We thought it was profound. I mean, we thought that the reading was profound, but in terms of rocking it, okay, of really understanding it at a deep level, we didn't get it at that time. And finally, I was in, I think, the first year of this group, or my Monday night groups, and we were meeting around a table, and they said, well, let's do the tarot. So I agreed to that, and by teaching the tarot, then I grokked it.
yeah, and I think it's interesting how many people start with that scholastic dogmatism, basically the ecclesiastical piece of tarot, where, I'm going to spit back out. I was like, I don't want to just put the stylus on a different song on the record. And that I already bought
and have it play yet again.
Yeah, I already bought the record. So tell me something new. What does this feel like? I mean, as Colleen would say, stay with the image.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting because, at a very young age, the cards just told me stories, visual stories, clearly as reading Grimm's fairy tales. Right. I didn't realize for 16 years later that, I still haven't read a book. I'm now in readings, and people say, well, what did you read to learn tarot? I said, cards. Yeah, but what books? Cards. If I
which is absolutely the right answer, but by far.
Yeah, and the thing is, though, that was kind of my I savantly wandered in as a child. And, you still have pictures as a visual language, and you're connected, and they're meaningful.
Mhm.
But I look up and say, well, if I see Einstein's face or Mary Cassatt's profile in a tree, well, that's divination. Except what it is that to me comes back to this, not that, overly scientific stuff. I think just the visual language, when you get to just that right frame on a Rodin sculpture or something where you get that wash of tingles, that's the indicator that you're experiencing beauty.
Well, that and then you've got it. Okay. In other words, when I've looked at Monet, Pollock, any number of great artists, including Van Gogh, I would see a postcard of it or a picture online, and I'd say, "Oh, okay, what's that about?" But in the case of Pollock, I'd say, "Well, geez, can a kindergartner do those scribbles? And who cares about lily ponds, for Monet?" But then when you go and you see the actual physical painting, oh my God, it's overwhelming. Then you grok it. And, I especially had that experience with Pollock and Monet, where with Monet, you look at the actual paintings and the paint is laid on about this thick on many of those paintings. And it's not just two-dimensional, even in the painting itself, it's three-dimensional.
No, he's, Monet's taken the gardens, the Tuileries, Giverny, and he's put a whole, topsoil of flowers on that canvas. I mean, he literally gardened the color, and
Right.
it had literal depth. And I find it's interesting too. And it's, to me, the way I find that tarot works is actually how psychology seems to work as well, where an image, a symbol that's generative, simply strikes a chord to resonate in the imagination, which then I think drops down to ring the doorbell of the unconscious, to then direct the creative drive to open the floodgate a bit and pour up or well up contents that are nourishing for the psyche, i.e. symbols and awake dream or dream language.
Right.
And I think that makes all kinds of sense. And then if you ask me what the creative unconscious is, what the creative drive is, what is the psyche and how does it work? Well, I can't tell you all those things all the time, but if I run the path of travel, after several decades, with, for example, tarot, it seems that it's the imaginative, the imaginal, but making then what wells up, not, okay, that's cool, that's creative, now get back to work, which diminishes and demeans the creative. It's, this creative idea that welled up, how am I going to make that into the heart of the matter of my actions?
Right.
And I think that's where I crafted the word imagination, capitalize the A.
Right.
And I think then that is the heart pouring up through the mind. And that way the thoughts have the heart of the matter. And if they don't, you simply say, well, that's not a priority. It's because it's checked.
So, one of the things that I'd like to make sure that nobody leaves this session without knowing is the definition of grok. Okay. And grok is a different idea from understand. It comes from a novel written by Robert Heinlein, a famous author who went to the Naval Academy, but then he wrote Stranger in a Strange Land, which is basically the entire book is a definition of grok. And so if you think religion doesn't have anything for you, then you haven't grokked it. You may think you understand it, but you haven't grokked it. If you think that you have to do something because the pastor up there in the pulpit says you have to believe, then you haven't grokked it. And And my wife told me a wonderful joke. So anyway, look up the word grok, Grok, in on Wikipedia. And one of the things that you need, you're going to grok here, is because as you bring something up on Wikipedia today, you get this message from Wikipedia, and it says, "To all our readers in the U.S., please don't scroll past this. This Sunday, we interrupt your reading to humbly ask you to defend Wikipedia's independence. 98% of our readers don't give. They simply look the other way. If you are an exceptional reader who has already donated, we sincerely thank you. If you donate just $2.75 or whatever you can this Sunday, Wikipedia could keep thriving for years. We ask you humbly, don't scroll away. If Wikipedia has given you $2.75 worth of knowledge this year, take a minute to donate. Show the world what access to reliable, neutral information matters to you." Okay, now the point here is that, everybody seems to have this, proprietary attitude about the internet. Everything should be free. Information should be free, but it's not free. And, in point of fact, it costs me several $100s a month to operate this YouTube channel. And so there are ways to send money to me. There's ways to send money to Wikipedia. But the point is that if you can't just assume all the time that everything is going to be free for you, and that therefore you're going to have a hard time in life, because people in life aren't going to give you things for free. Now, obviously, in terms of costs and benefits, when Jordan and I, who are not paid for this program, when we spend our time with you, we get a benefit that is not financial. Okay, in other words, we get the benefit of being able to share our ideas and our wisdom, to the extent it can be called wisdom, on the internet. And so that is a benefit to us, but it's not a financial benefit. And the reality, pardon?
A currency of value.
Right. And the reality is that it does cost people who provide internet content like Wikipedia money to present that. Now, what Wikipedia must have a wicked big supercomputer that it operates with, and it provides more than an encyclopedia, way more. Okay, because when I was growing up, when I was in the 7th grade, I think, my father bought the Encyclopedia Britannica for our family, and when it came in, I was really impressed. And there were all these boxes, and every box had a book in it, and I started to look through it, and boy, did I learn a lot from that encyclopedia. But encyclopedias have been put out of business now because Wikipedia and by the way, my father in those days, and that was in the late 50s probably, paid like $500 for that set of books. Yes. And in today's dollars, it would be more like $5,000. It was well worth the investment, even at that time. But the point is that Wikipedia has now put hardbound encyclopedias out of business because it's able to provide way more information than the original Encyclopedia Britannica. For example, you would surely find an article about Einstein in that book, but the chances of you finding an article about Skip Conover are next to nil or zilch, right? And same with Jordan Haggard. But the reality is that the way Wikipedia works is I can't create a description of me or Jordan. But if you take our names and put them out into Google, you will find that there are literally millions of links to us. Okay. And to, I'm not sure about Jordan because I haven't put his name in. But if you put either Donald L. Conover or Skip Conover, you're going to get well over 1 million hits that Google will deliver to you. And so that again is part of what the internet does for you. And yes, 98% of people don't pay for it, but that having the access to that, I mean, for me, I just wanted to look up the spelling of Robert Heinlein's name because I want to talk about him in my classes in the coming weeks. And so, there's a wonderful article about Robert Heinlein, and there are articles about many, many obscure people. You can certainly find my first ancestor in North America, Wolfert Gerritsen von Kohenhofen, because he was like he was one of the first mayors of what today is New York City. He was the Schepen of the Dutch West India Company colony called New Amsterdam back in the middle of the 17th century. And if you ever meet anybody named Conover, every single one of us is descended from that man, because Conover is a made-up name that's based on his original Dutch name. It's an Anglicization of Van Kohenhofen, and so when the Dutch, in their infinite wisdom, won the Second Anglo-Dutch War in 1657, there was a big war between Holland and England at that time. And when the Dutch won, they traded, believe it or not, they traded Manhattan for Suriname. Go figure. Okay. And the result of that decision was that today, about half of the Dutch soccer team is descended from people from Suriname, and about 20% of the Dutch population is descended from people from Suriname. And why did they want it? Well, they wanted it because in the 17th century, the gold was actually spice, and Suriname had a very rich spice market. And so the Dutch wanted access to those spices. And so they were willing to give up this piece of granite, which is the island at the center of the world. They gave that up so that they could have Suriname. And things change, times change. It's interesting. Okay, I've been yakking. Jordan, why don't you go ahead?
Well, and it's funny I think to stay consistent with the theme in these passages, the love of power, power of love, the evil and love that Jung started off with. So if I use a couple of military metaphors to launch back into marshal the forces and round the troops of the conversation I was talking, as prompted by when you said the things that aren't real, so to speak, that aren't physical and that are real. And then he says the psyche. And I think that my commentary on that, how the imaginal works, how the verb itself, a verb is not a thing. It's an energy, it's an action, it's a potential. Yes. It's a drive. And I think a verb is a very diluted but small seed of action, obviously.
Yep.
But that's the imaginal that, or the intentional, or the conscious that is pushing forward. So literally to marshal the troops and marshal the forces around the troops, then what happens is, because of that power, you can have that patience as focused power. I don't have to go on a maneuver with these things. I don't have to wield them like a weapon. I can utilize them from an experiential point to discern and inform my intuition to have better right action, as it were. And rather than it being moral, there comes a point where you're just not, I hate to put it this way, but everyone's good at something. And some people, they're just good at being dicks,
Yeah. Well, that could be.
And I think what happens is when you get beyond that point where you're simply not mean-spirited,
Right.
then it's no longer about being moral or amoral. Just because you are acting, it would fall in the moral category. Now, the thing is, people split the hair to make the distinction of somehow one opinion is different than another, makes one more or less moral.
Right.
Well, that's a bunch of.
Right. Well, the psyche is clearly real. And to go back to your noun and verb thing, okay, here's a cup. This is it. This is a noun. This is a cup. It's pretty white. It's pretty nondescript, but nonetheless, it's a cup. And a verb is something I do with that cup. I see the cup. But now, oh, by the way, you can't see me seeing the cup. You can see my eyes, and you can't see what my eyes see on this cup. Now I can say, okay, I see these two little coffee stains coming down the back of my cup, which you didn't know about until I just told you about it. But even now, you can't see it, so you have to imagine that those two coffee stains are on the back of my cup. And so that's all imaginal. That's all in the psyche. And so all verbs happen in the psyche. Okay, I smell. Okay, I smell. You can look at my nose. You can look at what I'm smelling. That's a thing. That's another noun. But my smelling, you can't see at all. And you can't imagine how I feel about that smell, right? And so we live entirely, all of our life is in the psyche. It's not in these physical objects around us, not at all. Okay, it's not in the camera that's in front of you when you're trying to watch this program on YouTube. It's not anywhere. It's in your head. That's all. And yes, you can imagine that this is a live program right now, but after 12 o'clock Eastern time today, whatever it is, September 25th, 2022, after 12 noon Eastern time, this is going to be imaginal. Everything will be imaginal. It'll be just a lot of electrons that are energetic in a certain way if you play your equipment in a certain way, and nothing more.
And I appreciate you going into the noun verb piece at length there, because that's really where I came up with imagination. Because to me, the creative process, and thank you, Jody, for that wonderful comment in the chat, much appreciated. But the imagination, I brought to light the fact that the invisible verb, the heart of the matter, that's, I would say intention is overrated. It's more important the way it comes across. Well, the intention was important. It was the seed, but the verb is, does the acorn turn into an oak? I mean, and so I think those things are of super importance, where beyond the psyche being real, actually expressing the process in how we experience it not how we ecclesiastically dogmatize it. We
Right.
don't lay it down.
And so the truth is that every oak is different. Okay, every oak tree is different. If you hold a acorn today, there is no chance in God's green earth or in the imagination that you can predict what that oak will look like when it's grown up. Not at all. And that's the case. That's the case in, a million times as much in a human being. Okay, because we're much more complicated than oak trees. And so, the point is that it's real. And so I want to go back to the metaphor that that Dr. Jung uses, because he says, I believe the psyche is real. Well, the psyche is pretty darn real, because everything that you experience is in your psyche. It's nothing more. Because as of right now, you're staring at a YouTube or a computer screen, and I'm not real in your room. I don't have anybody here in my room with me. And so the only way I'm real to you is because we have a lot of equipment between you and me that allows me to express my thoughts, but it's all in the psyche. And so here in this paragraph, the reason I'm emphasizing it is one of the most important paragraphs in Jungian thought, absolutely one of the most important. And what he says here is, what people can't understand is, I believe the psyche is real. That's what he says. And then he says, they believe only in the physical facts and must consequently come to the conclusion that either the uranium itself or the laboratory equipment created the atom bomb.
Right.
Well, the uranium itself is a thing. It's a noun. The laboratory equipment is a thing. It's a noun. The only thing that created the atom bomb was actions, verbs that brought those two things together and made it explode. That's what the atom bomb is. And and Einstein figured it out about over 100 years ago, almost 110 years ago. He figured out that if you did X with Y, these two nouns, if you put a verb in between it in the form of atomic fission, then it would explode. And sure enough, he was right. Okay. But human beings, out of billions of years of development, that's only been figured out in the last 110 years.
Well, yes. And I think to directly tie the uranium metaphor and example to individuation, if you take the half-life of uranium and the half-life of that half-life, and you get this radioactive material that goes all the way down to, it's not radioactive anything more than my television or my cup. Well, then that's called lead. And what's interesting is that's how lead shields from uranium, from radiation, is because the lead has been through the process of waiting from a radioactive, so-called rambunctious kid, through harnessing those forces into an ability to protect from overstimulation, from over intensity, and understand powerful limits instead of putting on these scientific, physical fact limits. Simply because someone says something, that's just a lot of stickers in the grass, just annoying, instead of actually running around. And I find that uranium half-lifing its way down to lead is like being in a raft in a river, and you're floating down the river, but like you said, we're just in our psyche, that's where we live. Then I'm in this larger version of myself called a raft. So your boundaries extend. Maybe there are several other people there with you, but we're floating down the river, and we can't just crash into rocks You have to
there's that. Plus, the way an atom bomb works is all of a sudden you come to a waterfall where all these rivers come together, and that's what Niagara Falls is. And all of a sudden, boom, it's all crashing together. And then it goes out the other side and there's a result. So you could say that Lake Erie is the culmination of all these rivers flowing together, and boom, you go over the waterfall, and then it's Lake Ontario that's radioactive afterward, right?
Well, completely. And I think then that makes for even the distinction of the word confluence. For things to be imploded into a confluence causes destruction, whereas like at the confluence, to bring people intensely together, but not in an implosion method, the confluence becomes creative.
Right.
So that's the creator's art rather than the creator's destruction. And so I think the difference between, it's like, someone doing a can opener or cannonball, you get the boom in the water. It's your personal, explosion you're creating, because there's concussion blasts. There's things where the water is pressurized and then it has to eject and all that. Whereas if you do, a nice jackknife, you just slide into the water, hopefully zero splash. I mean, so, and these days I would just be jackknife that looked like a can opener.
Okay, well, moving on, we need to do 752 because that's also important. I'd like to hear your comments on that, and then we need to finish up the book. So keep going.
So I think Jung's being very human here, giving him the courage to enter into the discussion of the religious question, finally, as it were. And again, material evidence. I think these paragraphs successively, one by one, come at the bone dry, ecclesiastical, scientific, factual structure, not like even an attorney to put together an argument. It's just that, if this is that, then it's all fine and we can move on. Well, to me, that's sorry, little Johnny and little Jane, you just failed your current events class presentation because all you did was show that happened. But it's like a photograph out of context.
Yeah.
And he says, endangered supremacy of Christ. Well, it's interesting. The endangered supremacy of Christ. Well, because the supremacy is about to be transferred to man, or has been humanity, people. And then that's the Christ as the capital S self. And I think then that's where he's working his way, I love it, scientifically and systematically around this fact problem to try to get that things that are psyche, things that are imaginal, that aren't so much facts, are then seen as facts. And I think the expression of that is it's well done in 752, especially Godhead, and in consequence, endangered supremacy of Christ, from which Protestantism will not budge. And, the interesting thing about that is that's, of course, then the dogma. Oh, I know this. You need your degree for that. No one will listen to you if you write that book unless you have a PhD in this. And, that's going back to, publication is a badge of honor. Well, in that scheme, 1920 to 1980, self-publication was vanity press, was you are putting it out yourself, and how dare you, because that's not a peer-reviewed paper. And the reality is now with self-publication, we get a lot more, yes, trash, but it's just like gold panning. You just got to let the alluvium go back out in the river, pick out the heavies, good. So
and with self-publishing, I just want to mention my wife has just written a book with two of my grandsons. Amazing. Okay, she wrote a book, and my 13-year-old grandson and my 15-year-old grandson contributed to this book, and their contributions were real and substantive. And the book is about to be published. Well, it is published on Lulu. And it's called Give Until You Till It Feels Good. Give Until It Feels Good. And because my wife is into philanthropy, and the idea of the book is to teach young people how to be philanthropists. And so she literally, one chapter of the book actually came from them. She hadn't thought of it, among other things, and she's been doing philanthropy all of her life. And so now with self-publishing, she's now got a press release that she's going to do, and we think it's going to be quite a popular book among certain quarters,
Right.
because people like donor advised funds in the adult world. We have funds that you can save money from taxes by putting money that you're going to later give into a fund, and then later on tell the people that are holding the money to give it to such and such charitable organization. That's what a donor advised fund is. And so this is teaching young people how to use those. So it's really amazing. And who writes a book like that Simon and Schuster will publish, right?
Well, yeah, that exactly. And I think that even that book replies to the Jung's statement, but religious statements without exception have to do with the reality of the psyche and not with the reality of physis being physical versus the psyche, not
Right.
The psyche being mind, psyche being something completely larger than that.
Right.
But the fact with philanthropy, it's another invisible verb, because it is playing the pre-acorn seed.
Right.
They can't even see the seed that's then leading to what someone else will be able to do with those funds. And in a sense, I call it symbolic money, because
Right.
it's generative. That money is going to go from currency of money to currency of value in someone else's process.
Right. And we all want to feel good. And one of the ways that we can feel good when we have sufficient funds so we can donate is by donating, because then we can feel good. I mean, that's what all these advertisements on television are. You send $19.95 a month to fix hair or lips or whatever it is. You feel good that you've helped those children who are born with hair and lips, or you feel good because you saved an elephant, whatever it is, and you get a symbol of your gift in the form of a nice fuzzy elephant or whatever it is. But even that fuzzy elephant is not just a plaything for your cat. It's a symbol of your generosity and all sorts of things. Right.
Well, even just this last week, I mean, Taos Main Street here locally had, merchant and community trash cleanup day on Monday and on Tuesday from 8 to noon. And on Tuesday, I was able to go from 8 to about 10:30. And, I had half of a huge bag of, just put on the gloves and pick stuff up and go through planters and go up and down the curbs. And I didn't venture probably more than 1,250 feet in any given direction,
Right.
and probably even more like 250 to 500. But there were 10 people, 20 people, and you're doing something that's community service oriented, which I always find that people interact so differently when money's not involved. I mean, when I was chair of community form and identity for a municipality in Colorado. You get 25 people in a room. Politics was never mentioned once. It was all volunteer. We were all volunteering for 12 months, which became 18 months because we expanded it. But the fact that 25 people can get along and in a very, very substantial way, well, just remove the money. And so I think that goes back to the philanthropy piece.
So, yeah. So this is how I marked this page of my book, right? Because when I read this part, I said, oh my God, this is what it's all about. And this is what all religions are about, because he makes this statement right before that one, which is really an impressive statement. He says, it does not matter at all that a physically impossible fact is asserted, because all religious assertions are physical impossibilities.
Yes.
If this were not so, they would be carried in the books of natural science. And so that's the point. When you go to religion, you're not going there to talk about facts, because if you were talking about, you're not talking about physical facts, because if you were talking about physical facts, they would be in the books of natural science and you'd study them in middle school. But none of them in any religion anywhere is a physical fact. That's the whole point about religions.
Faith and belief are not physical, but they are, they're factual, but they're not physical. And that's, I find a wonderfully clear distinction, where a lot of people say, well, but I can't touch it though. How is that factual? And it's just like these days, I think when you hear alternative facts, facts, truth, and love and friends need no adjectives.
Right. And so I've been asking my students this week, raise your hand if you think you're conscious. And okay, some of the little kids say, what's conscious? Right. But I say, well, you can see, you can smell, you can taste, you can hear, and you can touch. Okay, and through those senses, you have the physical world around you, but you still don't know what the elephant in the room is, right? And they really start to get it when you say that to them. And the amazing thing in art class, we have this doodle exercise, and the way the exercise begins is draw a straight line, and then draw another line that doesn't like straight lines, and then draw a happy line. And the kindergartners don't have any hesitation. They know what you mean by that. But by the time they get into middle school, they say, what do you mean, Mama? So anyway, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, no, that there's that systematic disassociation of the visual connection, not just the visual language, the visual connection, that place that needs no words, where you grok it, you get it, you have a deep knowing. And all four of the queens in the tarot are envoys of the Empress. Well, if you look at the philosophical, know thyself and you will know the universe. Well, that says it right there. But then people go, oh, no, I got to learn. It's like, no. Mine the gold from within, because it's a matter of refining. You're processing ore. It's the ability to not be terrified to suck at something new. You can, I've never been on this terrain. I'm going to have to sight read it while I'm moving out through looking for this. And there you go. One of my habits is I like to sight read decks, where I've never seen it before. And I will stay with the image, and the image will tell the story. What catches my eye? Well, that's the next step on the trail. And kind of being able to do that. And you get the kindergartners, they have no hesitation. because they're like, oh yeah, I get that. Boom, they're on it. And later they've been systematically had the heart of the matter beaten out to make it all, I'm proving, I'm explaining, I'm doing this so I don't get in trouble. I'm doing this so I'm a good person. I did that so I feel bad. I mean, there's all these things that are all up here in the head, except they have nothing to do with the heart. And they get further and further away. And I think that's the disconnection of the visual language.
So I'm going to let you go ahead. I'm going to take a brief break, but keep going on 753, 754 especially. And we're going to limit this to the bottom of the hour. We have to go to 758. Okay?
Sounds good.
All right. So go ahead.
So on 753, Jung is talking about logical consistency. This is the church is making dogma of then the assumption of Mary. And what's interesting when he says in this respect it is similar to Mithraism and found this prejudice very much to its detriment. Well, that is a curious piece there, because it's basically co-opting something that came before instead of adding the assumption of Mary as something new, something that's invigorating, as it would be, to bring the feminine divinity into that Godhead, or to re-bring it back. So when he says, but this equality requires to be metaphysically anchored in the figure of a divine woman as the bride of Christ, well, this kind of reminds me of Lilith. Maybe she doesn't need to be the bride of Christ. Maybe it's like Lilith, she's going to do something different than what's expected. So I think, again, this arranged marriage, as it were, it's convenient to psychologically express it for the alchemical components. But when you have this bride of Christ, it's like, well, what does Mary think? Is this consensual? I mean, so it's just two characters superimposed on the psyche to express the two different pieces that they represent. But at the same time, it seems to kind of round peg, square hole, try to fit the feminine into just another empty male role that happens to be a woman. And I think that what's interesting there is that then just strengthens the dogma for everybody, because now they've brought a woman in with the assumption of Mary, and Queen of Heaven would be like Juno or Hera or Gaia in other cultures, which she was already there, or Shekinah, the original. And I think what's interesting here is that the church brought in the assumption of Mary by papal decree in really a way that didn't change the system that was already present. So the assumption of Mary, there's an opportunity for the church or ecclesiastical structures to add a new component, but all they did was fashion an empty male template piece, and that's very hard and brittle, and then pour Mary into that piece. Well, it's not even cookie cutters, because they're probably not even chocolate chips in there. I mean, and so I think what's interesting about with 753 is it's really cursing, so to speak, at the church. I mean, the bride of Christ. Well, why does she have to be the bride of Christ? Why isn't Mary Lilith? I mean, she made her own decision. And as I mentioned before, the bride of Christ, okay, now we're representing two components of the psyche. But if I personify them, so what does Mary think about that? Well, she's not bringing a new component. She just happens to look female and now co-opt everybody else in. Like, oh, we're all included, so now we can all be fooled. I mean, so
Okay, well, I have this is a Stump the Stars question, and I want to ask for our YouTube audience to particularly pay attention to what I'm about to talk about and give your reaction to it. And our private panelists here on Zoom, I'd like for you in the chat to give your reaction here. So next year, a year from now, or a year from this month, we will be offering our confluence in Mount Madonna, California. And the theme of the confluence is the feminine rising, or the emergence of the feminine. Okay, now, I received an email from someone who is involved in this, and the email had a title. I'm not going to tell you what the title is yet, but the only thing in the email was an image, and I'm going to show you the image, keeping in mind that this is someone who's helping us put together Feminine Rising, right? And I want you to give me your first reaction to this image. And because that's the only thing that was in this image, in this email, was this image, plus the name, there was a title to the email, but I'll tell you that in a minute. Okay, so here is the image. Are you ready? There you go. There it is. Okay, so any comments? The title of our confluence is going to be the Feminine Rising.
Well, the bay window is the breast of a house that protrudes, and I love the wheel in there because it's everything growing, generative, verdant, and look at all the vessels, but they're all overflowing in ways that are wonderfully groomed and also on their own. The light comes in, they're sitting on the dark. This image is a story of the creation and destruction in one piece. And at the same time, it's the way forward, moving out, pushing the vessel. I mean, stick your hand in a half bag. And
I'm not seeing any comments from the YouTube audience. I'd love to see some comments on it. This is the image that was sent out.
And Jyoti has a comment in the chat, which I will read out.
Okay.
Being and becoming such is the experience of evolution. Nice.
And Kathy Kerr says on YouTube, watch your fingers. That's my reaction to the image. Okay, well, maybe you're causing me to soften my view, but mind you, we're offering an experiential teaching that conveys the feminine, okay, that conveys the idea of the feminine rising. And Patrick Hollywood says, I see a golden thread. Very good, Patrick. Okay, but what I see is, I see tone deafness. Okay, I see that this does not seem to convey the feminine rising. This, to me, conveys the stereotypical feminine that has been with society for thousands of years. Your reaction to that?
I think the bay window, I'll go back to that, because to me, that's generative. That's pushing through the envelope of the container of the house or the building. That's making sure that when breathing room needs to happen, the king or queen can crack that cup and grow. And in a sense, the cracking of the cup is the snake, its skin shedded, the snake, its skin not missed. So I think the bay window is a metaphor there of how the container, how the vessel is from the imaginal, adjusted, modified, or like the Mithraic piece, from mystery moved into a new shape or a new, and it's a new vessel. And I think the container, the bay window, is a metaphor, like swimming the river. It's never the same. The river, when I swim today, there's that, but tomorrow the river has moved on and I have changed. And so it's a different experience every time. And I think that's the metaphor of the bay window, of it pushes the envelope literally out to grow.
Well, okay. I stand corrected because I was pretty upset when I saw this as offering with no comment. And I reacted to this as being, a patriarchal insistence on the status quo. Okay. And Kathy says a sleeping psyche. And so I do see Patrick's point about a golden thread, because that has been a theme throughout our Confluence development. And Patrick was with us in Helena. And so he certainly has seen that as we've done it. And, I see your point about the bay window. And
I also, in that point with the bay window, I also agree then with Kay on the chat that she sees domestication tied to a certain role or job, but it's put in the background surrounded by new growth. So in her comment, there's both, and which I think is important, because that role tied to this growth, yeah, it's put down on that window seat, but at the same time, that could be defining a role or limiting the role instead of it being pushing the envelope.
Yeah.
So that domestication piece is, I think, important to. The domestication piece is the same ecclesiastical making it a dogma piece. I mean, those are the same kind of concept. And I agree that when this grows, well, it needs to grow on its own terms to naturalize, like in a garden.
Right. Oh, good. That's good. I'm glad I asked, because that helps me see my own shadow. And it helps me, I was thinking of this as just so stereotypical that it had no redeeming value. But I do agree with all of you that there is a redeeming value. But as Kathy says here, watch your fingers. That's my reaction to this, which is,
aloe vera and cactus. And
if you're going to start spinning webs of whatever kind, you better watch your fingers and so on. And
the story, I mean, don't prick the finger. And it's like,
right.
It's, we could go into, molecular detail, but then I'm going, oh, look at the wheel. And it only has, it has 10. What's the 5 and 5? What's interesting, 5 above, 5 below, nature number is 5.
Right. And since we've got the horizontal here, now that I'm seeing it, we've got the horizontal as with the above as 4 things and the below as 4 things.
5.
Which, pardon?
Aren't there 5? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
No, but I'm saying that the horizontal ones, if you see that as the horizon, okay,
right,
then you see 4 above and 4 below. So you see basically
the 4.
Huh?
Where's the 4?
I see
5.
There's 4
spokes.
That are going out from the
from 5
from the horizon, and there's 4 spokes that are going down from the horizon. So as above, so below.
Yeah, 4 spokes, 5 spaces. Now, okay, I see your 4 now. You were looking at the thing, and I was looking at the space between. That's interesting.
Right. and so it's, and I like your idea that the feminine rising has to come out naturally, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's the whole metaphor of gardening. I mean, it's no patience. It's first year roots, second year foliage, third year flowers and fruits. And you deadhead every flower that comes off in those first 2 years. The first year to drive the energy to the roots, the second year to drive it to the foliage. So then it can support the flowers and fruit that come.
Right.
And then the fourth year, things begin to naturalize. So then, the tiger lily will pop up over there, or the heirloom fir peony will need to be divided. And, so there's a whole lot of how something matures in a garden. And it does so on its own, I mean, between resistance in soil and how a bulb travels, or how something tubers to pop up somewhere else. So yeah, the naturalizing thing, I think, is of key importance. And that naturalizing is another invisible verb, and that's, I think, also key.
Well, Kathy's said more about what she thinks now. She says, as a woman, I find it depressing. For me, this represents too many things that are dismissive of feminine uprising, and to reframe it feels like gaslighting. Trying to reframe it feels like gaslighting. Very interesting, Kathy. That's was something like my reaction. I think because you're a woman, you see it more clearly than I do. But I projected onto this. This image came from a man, and the title on the email was "Feminine Rising," and so I don't know. Would you say this, Kathy? I think you would say definitely that this does not represent feminine rising, but Jordan seems to think it does.
No, actually, I think the bay window does,
Uh-huh.
but the empty skeletal patriarchal wheel overshadowing all this life there is gaslighting. Oh, look, you can grow, but grow small, stay small. So, I mean, to me, I would kind of open the window and wish it was a little bigger so I could roll the wheel right out the window. I mean, let it rust a little bit, let it get some character instead of being this masculine patriarchal gaslighting piece, because it of little or no substance is attempting to, by height and scale, rule over all these other things which are enduring life and living more in thrival than in survival. So I would agree, because to me the bay part is the pushing of the envelope, but then the contents in here like lose the wheel, or
well, and
the wheel on its side.
Yeah, and doesn't this image say "stay in the house"?
Well, the wheel, the cycles actually are a boundary impediment for 2/3 of the windows. It's basically saying stop. It might as well be a red octagon, painting a stop sign in a way. But I agree with Kathy about the gaslighting piece, and then it's actually a pretty relatively insensitive. It's a nice attempt. I get the gardening piece, but they're all in container pots. Well, that's like, mind your step. That's not a powerful limit. It's a limitation kind of limit. Yeah, and in the comments, seeing it now as limiting, not rising. And I think what I find there is the idea of powerful limits. Well, they're alive, they're pulsing, and this is limitation, I think, rather than rising. Because rising, like bread, the whole thing gets bigger, top, round, bottom. I mean, it's expanding, and I think this is not expansive. Honestly, I would like to erase the wheel, and I would like to erase that scale thing. Oh no, that's the sitting, and that's the spinning. So yeah, that is gaslighting. I mean, where's the golden thread to be woven?
Yeah, Kathy goes on, she says, listen to your gut, Skip. Oh, snap, a man said that. Phew. Right. It's a downer final answer.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yep, that was how I would have thought about it. Right.
Yeah. I mean,
it says stay in the house.
Yeah.
You can expand a little bit in the bay window, but boy,
yeah, we made an addition on our prison cell. It's like,
yeah. Yeah, Kathy says I'd jump out that window.
yeah.
Okay, very good.
Well, I love the discussion that's sparked by this, and it kind of starts and it runs its own river.
Then Patrick says, I think it does. I like the image, actually. Cinderella sewed along with her chore. She was a plant birthed through Disney, representing dreams and overcoming hardships. Just my perspective. And Kathy says, it says, look at that nice view, and look, if you prick your finger, I have healing plants right there that you can use right at arm's length. And if your psyche falls asleep, I'll just kiss you and that'll wake you up. I'm your hero. Very good.
That's a nice.
Okay. All right. We've digressed too much, though. So let's go back to the last paragraph of Answer to Job. And I do really appreciate your comments, Kathy. Thank you very much. It helps me for a conversation I'm going to have today.
Yeah, I like especially the gaslighting piece, because it's like, oh, look, I'm going to look out the window in freedom. Oh, but look at the work I have to do first. And it's like, it's kind of like part of the gaslighting is the come but stay. It's this kind of thing. It's oh yeah, no, yes, no. And I laugh that gaslighting often reminds me of Stephen Wright, who said he named his dog Stay. It's like, come here, Stay. Come here, Stay.
Right. Right.
Actually, I most appreciate Kathy's gaslighting comment, because that wow, that really says, that's the title of that bay window to me.
Right. Okay.
So 758.
So that this is what Dr. Jung is talking about, Mithraism and especially Protestantism, so completely missing the point. Okay.
And Mithraism being mystery religion.
Yeah. But it didn't have a feminine component, apparently, which I wasn't aware of except through this paragraph. So, Jordan, I'm going to cut your other points on these paragraphs short. Because I want to get to 758, and I'm not sure we have time to finish it, but we should. So paragraph 758, we've been working toward this for 6 months, and finally we're at the last paragraph of Answer to Job. And this is one of the most important paragraphs in the book. As I have said, the last 10 paragraphs are very important, or 13 paragraphs, maybe paragraphs 745 to 758. And these numbers relate to the paragraph numbers in volume 11 of the collected works of C.G. Jung. So if you want to see the context of it in total in volume 11, which is Psychology and Religion, there is an electronic version of volume 11 available through our Dropboxes, and you can find it in collected works. It's in the Carl Jung Psychology Dropbox, not in the Advanced Reading Group Dropbox. And so I hope you can look at that. And so I'm going to read 758 and then give Jordan the first dibs on talking about it. So it will probably have become clear to the reader that the account I have given of the development of symbolic entities corresponds to a process of differentiation of human consciousness. But since, as I showed in the introduction, the archetypes in question are not mere objects of the mind, but are also autonomous factors, i.e., living subjects, the differentiation of consciousness can be understood as the effect of the intervention of transcendentally conditioned dynamisms. In this case, it would be the archetypes that accomplish the primary transformation. But since in our experience, there are no psychic conditions which could be observed through introspection outside the human being, the behavior of the archetypes cannot be investigated at all without the interaction of the observing consciousness. Therefore, the question as to whether the process is initiated by consciousness or by the archetype can never be answered, unless, in contradiction to experience, one either robbed the archetype of its autonomy or degraded consciousness to a mere machine. We find ourselves in best agreement with the psychological experience if we concede that to the archetype a definite measure of independence, and to consciousness a degree of creative freedom proportionate to its scope. Then there arises that reciprocal action between two relatively autonomous factors, which compels us, when describing and explaining the processes, to present sometimes the one, sometimes the other factor as the acting subject, even when God becomes man. The Christian solution has hitherto avoided this difficulty by recognizing Christ as the one and only God-man. But the indwelling of the Holy Ghost, the third divine person in man, brings about a Christification of many. And the question then arises whether these many are all complete God-men. Such a transformation would lead to insufferable collisions between them. So, to say nothing of the unavoidable inflation to which the ordinary mortal, who is not freed from original sin, would instantly succumb. In these circumstances, it is well to remind ourselves of St. Paul and his split consciousness. On one side, he felt he was the apostle directly called and enlightened by God. And on the other side, a sinful man who could not pluck out the thorn in the flesh and rid himself of the satanic angel who plagued him. That is to say, even the enlightened person remains what he is, and is never more than their own limited ego before the one who dwells within them, those whose form has no knowable boundaries, who encompasses him on all sides, fathomless as the abysms of the earth and vast as the sky. Okay, there's a lot of meat in that, so go for it, Jordan.
and this paragraph seems to be that picture you received, that bay window, that it's a male's version of, oh yeah, the feminine rising. Look at all these little plants and little vessels, and instead of even forest giants and concrete pots, so to speak. And what's interesting is the male version of that. This paragraph really speaks to that, and I think I'll pick out the the pronoun usage, because women are much more developed in those small healing plants in small pots in that bay window, and not sequestered over to that one little extension of the balcony with glass panes. I mean, so it's interesting here where the Christification piece and the split consciousness piece, I think the split consciousness is lost in the ecclesiastical dogma. And it's not even one or the other. It's that empty, bone dry wheel on that, spinning wheel, where it's one thing to see the whole picture, but I did not notice the spinning wheel part of it until I'm like, wow, why are there only 10? Why aren't there 8 or 12 spaces? And then I look over to the left and go, oh, it's a spinning wheel. That's why, because that's you use the handles. I mean, it's easier than 8 or 12. 10 it's a cadence number.
Mhm.
But what's interesting here is, the unavoidable inflation to which the ordinary mortal, who is not freed from original sin, I've got a cartoon picture of this little baby with this little squinched up face, all confused. And it's like, original sin? I just got here. WTF did I do? I mean, and so I think there's that childlikeness there, but then also later, I'm not going to walk around like a felon trying to return to society and prove that I'm changed and a good person. Why do all these people walk around as if they're criminals? Well, there's that shame-based Christification where, he died for our sins kind of thing. And I think what's interesting is that's cool, but being a martyr, it's like personal gaslighting. Your implosion, introversion gaslighting, as it were. And I think that with this paragraph in mind, I really dial into, it is well to remind ourselves of St. Paul and his split consciousness. On one side, he felt he was the apostle, and on the other side, a sinful man. So in a sense, these things, he had a dynamic tension. And I think what's interesting is the sinful piece. If we can step off the negativity piece and say, no, that's alive, that is impure. Because honestly, being pure, frankly, would be boring. And it's too clean of a clean. So you Peter Pan to Captain Hook, Peter Pan staring his future self right in the face, because Captain Hook goes out and loses an arm and loses a leg. And go ahead, read John 11-14 there. You put in the
Well, what I'm saying is, this paragraph is basically saying the same thing as was said in the Apostle John's book in the Bible. In other words, it's been in the Bible all along, but a lot of people have just ignored it, but it's in the Bible all along. And so in that passage in the Bible, it does anticipate the Christification of many. It allows for others to become children of God, not only Jesus Christ, but all of us. And so that's already in the Bible. It's not so, and it's already in the first 4 apostles in the Bible, right? And it's sitting there in plain sight, where you can become a child of God and therefore a son or daughter of God, no doubt. And people just have ignored that or whatever. I mean, it's just incredible.
Well, I think the whole, the St. Paul and his split consciousness, I think people pendulum back and forth. I feel divine, I feel sinful. I feel divine, I feel, sin, oh, wow. I feel divine, and back and forth, instead of like Alan Watts, where there's a life affirming spirituality, where you're navigating with the both and of this golden inner divinity and this, tarnished, wonderfully patinaed, broken, beaten self that is enjoying the process and has the ability to navigate with both. I look at it like, gasoline is toxic. It's toxic. Well, unless you know to put it in a gas tank, a closed vessel container, hook it to an ignition, turn a key and go vroom, vroom. Now it's not toxic. Now it's actually a lot of fun.
Or get you where you're going.
Where you're going. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's that.
If you explode it, it'll get you where you're going too, but it won't be where you think.
Where you think, exactly. And in that sense too, I think that explosion of gas, it's like transcendent like music. Music is the most transcendent and purely original divine divination, because music will move you or move you away from it. It's like, oh, I don't like that. And but it calls without any words. It's just with the sound. And I think that's the metaphor here with St. Paul's split consciousness. Instead of being split, it's understood to be differentiated. And it's understood to not be composed of one undivided piece. It's one actualized, differentiated piece.
Right. Okay. So I'm sorry to say this, but I have to wrap this up with a joke. Okay, because my wife told me a joke today or yesterday, and it seems so apropos. And it's something that our listeners might remember going away from this. So the joke is that there's a pastor who's giving a sermon, and in the front row is a man who raises his hand and he says, "I want to ask a question." Well, the pastor doesn't usually allow questions during a sermon, but because this man is one of the big donors to the church and he's going to have to go ask him for more money next month, he decides to allow the question. And the question is, will only Christians go to heaven? Will only Christians go to heaven? Or will only, think of it as, will only born again Christians or Baptists go to heaven? And so the pastor sort of stopped in his tracks and he says, "Well, I want to think about that question a little bit over the coming week. So I'll have an answer for you next week." And so church is over, and the pastor spends the next week going out asking everybody he knows, all his fellow pastors, the rabbi, the priests, everybody, about this question and how to answer it, because he's not sure how to answer it. And I can tell you that my pastor, when I was 30 years old, would not have been able to answer this question, not at all. And so nobody gives him a definitive answer. And so he decides to pray on it. And he starts his prayer and he gets very much into his prayer, and still conscious, but he's suddenly getting a vision that he's in a train station and he's going down the tracks, and the first stop on the train, he gets on the train, and the first stop on the train it says heaven. So he steps off the train and he looks around, and there's somebody there. Maybe it was St. Peter, and it's a very quiet place. There's a little harp music and so on, and but it's very quiet and peaceful. And he thinks, geez, where else is this train going? And so he decides to jump back on the train, and it goes to the next stop, and the next stop says hell. And he gets off the train, and man, there are parties going on everywhere. Everybody's having a great time. It's a terrific place to be, it seems, and it's like a resort. And so he starts to ask this devilish looking figure, well, I thought hell was full of fire and brimstone. And the devil says, well, that's the way it used to be until the Buddha got here.
I love that. I haven't heard it that way. I like that one actually better, because I've heard that joke, except, well, that's the way it used to be until the engineers got here and put in central air and heat. Central air and cooling, it's like, so yeah, I liked it until Buddha got here. Nice. Yeah, lived a life.
Because
Buddha went to hell. That's
oh, I forgot part of it. The question in the middle of the joke was, did Mahatma Gandhi go to hell, and did the Buddha go to hell? And so then he has this vision, and it just seemed to me sort of the perfect note to end this on, and the fact that it's already in the Bible. Okay, it's already right there in plain sight, what Jung is saying, and nobody sees it, and everybody wants to believe that their way is the right way, and the reality is that when you die, your physical body is either going to be cremated and therefore become ash immediately, or it's going to be put in a box and put in the ground and rot there. Okay, that's the reality of the physical world. And so, but religion isn't about that. Religion is about the psychic world, the psyche, and how you feel about how you lived your life. And wouldn't it be terrible to get to the end of your life and think that you haven't made any waves, so you've been a perfect person, and therefore you should get to play a harp for eternity? Good Lord.
Yeah, you can only go to the Ren Fest a couple, 3 days a year.
Right. And the heaven you go to, and this is known to the alchemists since forever, a long time, is the heaven you go to is situated in the psyches of your descendants, and in the psyches of the people that you've interacted with over your lifetime. That's where that's where heaven is.
Definitely. And I love the Buddha going to hell piece, because it's right there in front of everyone in the Bible, except they're viewing it through the frame of the lens of the patriarchal scientific I believe, rather than I know deeply. And the eros of the I know deeply versus that logos, analytical, logical fact, dead kernel of a rock kind of thing, of an artifact of then the fact that the visual language is missing. So yeah. Buddha basically as a metaphor for, oh, well, yeah, until Buddha got here. And what happened is then he changed the perspective, and the perspective change was not just allowed, it grew and it naturalized. And even as a joke, it's wonderful. And actually as a metaphor of allowing the perspective shift.
Yeah.
So,
and the point is that Buddhism is liking in psychology. Buddhism is all about duality and the energies of the two sides. And there's no right and there's no wrong. And the point is that when you reach the conjunctio, the confluence comes into the conjunctio. When you reach that, then there's nothing. Then there's nirvana. Right. That's what the Buddhists are talking about. That the duality goes away because they merge together and become one.
Yeah.
And that's all dualities. Now we have a few comments here, so I want to read them to you. Kathy says, "Thanks for reading Answer to Job, guys. It's been great." And thank you, Jordan, for reading it with me.
Oh, you're welcome.
Terrific to do it together and to have two perspectives on it. And I think that we've done something good here. And I hope everybody that comes back to this YouTube channel will go back to the playlist, which I created. And I think I hope it's created in the right order, but I'm going to go back through it and make sure that the playlist goes from beginning to end, so that somebody can come back and watch these videos.
Well, I like especially in keeping with the allowing the perspective change of the Buddha in hell, kind of thing, and allowing the differentiation. I've learned a lot in regards to our perspectives being different enough in places simply because of each of our whole life up to this point and what we could both pour in. So I appreciate the back and forth where I love that, we can both enter into dissenting places. We don't even have to agree to disagree. We're not batting at each other. Yeah. There's hammering through this to really keep the malleability, but get the key points out there that are really not seen or spoken about much in the public. And I think that messaging we were able to both bring together from our perspectives, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And it's usually a problematic text to go through, but I think we can both each quickly sift,
Yeah. So there's one other comment here. The Wendigo says, "I was thinking all beings are the same organism. They all descend from a common ancestor, all cells and pass down." That's pretty wild. And, in a sense, that's very true and clearly shown by the fact that the pufferfish created mandalas 200 million years ago, long before there were human beings.
And I think that's even referred to as the one electron theory, with the differentiation of orbit within orbit within orbit. I mean, you get the boson part. That gig. No matter how far you go, you'll get further in. It's infinite, and no matter how far you go out, you'll get further out. It's infinite, and there comes a point where the explanations are just one more solar system inside the valence shells of one more solar system inside.
Lots of mansplaining there.
Yeah.
So what are we going to read from now on? I'm putting my Answer to Job away for a couple of years. So
yeah.
What is your desiderata?
Why don't we do affect regulation and the origin of the self, the neurobiology of emotional development? How about not? That's one of the riveting texts I have on my table on my book.
Yeah.
I wonder if we should we do synchronicity?
Synchronicity. Now there's a possibility.
Because I bought this back in rebought it. It's one of the few from the move. Because this synchronicity kind of is, it feels like ion, but condensed. And actually more accessible, I think, than ion.
Well, synchronicity is surely important. And so I will take that under advisement. I'm not sure I have one on my shelf, but I will definitely buy one if I don't.
Yeah, and the new one has a foreword by Sonu Shamdasani. Let me see. But what I love even about synchronicity, then the subtitle or the subtitle is an acausal connecting principle.
Yeah.
So that acausal piece, like our silence of the verb we were talking about today.
Yeah, and there were, I think that's a brilliant suggestion. I'm going to accept that. I know I've read it and I know I have it somewhere, but if I can't find it immediately on my shelf, I'm going to order it today. So thank you for the suggestion, and thank you all my audience for your comments about the image that I showed earlier in this video. And that has helped me immensely. I can't even begin to tell you. And
that was a fun exercise.
Pardon?
You may have to, because it's synchronicity is extracted from volume 8, the structure and dynamics of the psyche.
Okay.
So you may have volume 8 and
we have it electronically, and so okay, what paragraphs is it?
It starts, let me get past the forward. Paragraphs 816 through 816 through 997.
Okay. All right. So for all of you out there in YouTube land and our other guests here on Zoom, they're in the announcement that I sent out today. There is a link to our Dropboxes, and in the Dropbox entitled Carl Jung Depth Psychology, you will find collected works, and under that you will find all the collected works of C.G. Jung in electronic form. And so you can then select volume 8 and start reading paragraphs 816 to 997 about synchronicity. I have synchronicities daily, as I have said. Many of them are truly profound, and I think that it's definitely an important Jungian topic. So we will do that next week. Are there any other questions or ideas from our audience that we're not addressing? And I'll leave it for 15 seconds. See if there are any other questions that pop up. But
yeah, I think synchronicity would be good, because even the subtitle, an acausal connecting principle, there's those reasons are unreasonable, that you don't, these things occur, they live in life, in the psyche, and they don't need any scientific explanation to exist.
Exactly. And our problem has been since the beginning of the endarkenment that we think we know everything because we can name it. And we can physically touch it and name it, but the reality is that we can't. And
that goes back to the unspoken name of God, the unspoken word, the ineffable. Well, it's not ineffable, meaning I'm challenging you harder to explain this and mansplain this. It's no. You don't have to fill the silence all the time. You can
absolutely, and
that breathing room of the space between, which gives things living.
And it's just like quantum physics. We can't explain it, but it works, right?
Yeah, and what I think about quantum physics is it's just another way to say the capital N nature. It's like, except it's just, okay, great, we got a closer approximation. But if I try to divide the number 1 by 2 until I get to 0, it's like 1/2, 1/4, 1/8. I'll never get there. So
That's right.
what's the point of the ad infinitum ad nauseum?
Right. And
just
just to appreciate how important quantum physics is, if what people who are working on quantum computing know is that if you can work with 16 only quantum entanglements, and put those in a computer, then it will be faster than any supercomputer that we currently have. And they're very close to it. I expect that in the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to have quantum computers on the market. Right. And it's going to be a mind bender, because most people won't have a clue how that works, and it's not a question of cause and effect. It just is.
You won't have to turn it off and turn it on. You just think it off and think it on.
Right, something like that. Okay.
All right.
So, and Jyoti says, reminds me of Skip, Denang, and Hope. Great next selection. Thank you. Okay, thank you. And
right.
So we'll see you all next week, and we will begin with synchronicity. It's a great idea.
Cool.
And it's an idea whose time has come, obviously.
Synchronistically speaking.
Yeah, synchronistically speaking, it's an idea whose time